Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. So exciting. Last time we did Frankenstein. Next time we're doing Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. Now remember, next Monday is Labor Day, but next Tuesday there will not be a class. I mean, not my class anyway. I have to be out of town. Apologize for that, but it's built into the syllabus. So anyway, next Tuesday we will not have class, but we'll pick up with some great stuff after that. Now, we talked about, let's see, things to talk about. I don't know, things are going pretty well. I think the midterm is coming up now for another month or so, so we're not going to worry about that. But we are going to talk about this wonderful book by Charles Dickens and talk about a really interesting character. This guy lived in the 19th century, the 1800s, and he lived he was born like in 1812, lived till 1870, so he saw a great deal of the 19th century. He was an unusual person in that he was incredibly famous in his lifetime. A lot of people we're going to read, like Emily Dickinson, they die and nobody even knows about them. But everybody knew about Charles Dickens. Just in Europe, not just in England, but all over Europe, he was read by Dostoevsky and lots of folks. And he was very famous here in America too. And still, 150 years later, he's one of the most popular authors. His books have never gone out of print, and it's because he tells such great stories. And we'll talk about the stories, we'll talk about the times in which he lived, we'll talk about the man himself as we look at this today. I got some mixture of classic illustrations and a few other things. Oh, wrong button. There we go. All right. Now, if you want to create a story, if you want to create a character, and a really good way to do it is to give them a hard beginning, like Harry Potter. Harry Potter, he loses his parents, Voldemort kills him, he spends his formative years under a stairway in a closet. That's really a great way. Dorothy, Wizard of Oz, she's an orphan too. Well, Charles Dickens was not an orphan, but he had a really rough time. He was certainly not a wealthy person to begin with. He died as a very wealthy guy, but not at the beginning. His boyhood, his childhood was tough. His father, he meant well, but he was invested in some crazy schemes and lost the family money, and his father ended up in debtor's prison. Now, I don't think we have debtor's prison. I know some people would like to bring it back, I was just reading. But debtor's prison was something that was terribly feared back in the 19th century, in America and in England as well. It's where you went if you couldn't pay your debts. If you got yourself in over your head, people could bring a lawsuit against you, and you would be sent to debtor's prison to do menial, back-breaking labor, like making rope for ships or something, until you somehow paid your debt back. And the interesting thing is, when you did it, when you were sent to debtor's prison, your family went with you, at least some of them. Charles Dickens, his mother, and some of his siblings went with his father to debtor's prison. And Charles visited them on weekends when he could, which wasn't very often, because Charles, when he was 12 years old, didn't go with his family because he was old enough to work outside the home. And he was sent to a blacking factory. Now, that word probably has no meaning to most people, but what it is shoe polish. Shoe polish may not have meaning to a lot of folks either. When I was young, my father, every Sunday morning, he'd bring out his kit and we'd polish our shoes before church. That was just standard procedure. And that shoe polish came in little cans, and it was usually black and a real pasty, waxy sort of stuff. Great for like putting on your little brother or something like that if you wanted to get in trouble. But Charles's job was to take those cans and put labels on them, which doesn't sound too bad, but he did it for 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. It was just, it was a tough work, and it made a huge impression on him as a boy. He only did it for a couple of years, And then his father, his father's mother actually died, left the family a little bit of money. His father was able to pay off his debts. And so Charles got to go to school for a little while. He was in and out of school during his whole boyhood, never really got to spend much time in a classroom. And in the classrooms he did get to spend any time in, he talks about them being cruel. The teachers were just so mean. They, would hit people all the time. So it was, and they didn't teach all that much either. So it was a really rough childhood for Charles Dickens. That's the main takeaway, and something that he carried with him in his life and in his writings. Well, the great thing about Dickens that you see in a lot of authors, especially in the 19th century, most of them did not go to college. There weren't that many colleges and universities around, but most of them were self-taught to a great extent. And Charles was one of those. He was like Alexander Hamilton, pulling all the books on the shelf and reading them. So every chance he got, every book he could find, he read voraciously. He loved fiction stories, but he loved all sorts of books and history, you name it. He was into it. But anything, especially that was fiction and that was stories, he would read whatever time he had. He spent that reading. So he was largely a self-taught person, which is something we're going to see again as we move through the course. Now, one of Charles's talents, he had several really good talents. He loved acting. He was involved as from a boy, and again, whatever time he could pull together apart from reading and working in the factory, he loved theaters. And he loved going to the theater, and you would pay like half a penny and you could see a play. He would go every chance he got. He acted in community theater type production. They had those. As he got older into his teens and late teens, he was a very talented actor. People talked about. He was very comfortable on the stage, very comfortable in presenting himself, and he was great at impressions. I don't know if you've ever run into somebody like this. It's a rare and wonderful talent where somebody can get up and imitate other voices, like, I don't know, Donald Trump or whatever. They nailed it. And they're not just like on Saturday Night Live where they make a half-hearted effort, to be somebody. They really, okay, some of them are very good, I admit. But Charles was really, really exceptional at this. With impressions. So he could do voices, he could sound like a little girl, he could sound like an old man, he could do anything. And this, again, would serve him really well. And we'll see it's something that he did in the future when it comes to his books. Now, he grows up, he's about your age. Everything happens when people are about your age. He goes into journalism. That's his first job. He becomes a writer. He goes to the courts. He goes to everywhere, and he writes this down and he submits it to journals and magazines, newspapers, whatever he can find to make a little bit of money. He's very good at it. He's a superb writer. He's a great observer. He has a fantastic memory. He loves characters, and he talks about the different characters that he meets and the people that he meets while he's reporting on these stories. And so he does okay. He makes some money at this. It was a time when journalism was maybe not the most prestigious job in the world, but it made a little bit of money, and he was happy with that, and he was doing okay as he started out his career. Now, he was also a devout Christian. He had some serious flaws, which we're going to talk about. But he was a guy who took religion seriously. He was a member of the Anglican Episcopal Church of England tradition. And it comes out in his writings very often where he brings Christian themes in. He's not an overt Christian writer like, say, C.S. Lewis is. He's more like Flannery O'Connor, who we're going to read a little bit later. Christian themes are always coming into his stories. But he was one of those who, from the very start, he was raised in a Christian home, and he took religion, and he took his faith very seriously. Lots of other writers in the 19th century didn't take religion seriously at all, but Charles Dickens did. And if you read his works with an eye towards that, you can see some very interesting qualities that will come out in them. But anyway, just a factor. His religious beliefs, his faith, informed his actions. They not only informed his writings, but they informed his actions that he was going to do when he got involved in social reform and different charities. So it goes throughout his entire life. One of the first, he's working as a reporter, as a journalist, but he comes up with this idea of doing the serial stories. Now, this was something that was not particularly popular at the time, but he goes to a magazine editor and he says, you know what, sir, I would like to write stories, and your magazine comes out once a week, I will contribute. And there'll be a series of stories loosely related to each other, kind of like 30 Rock or whatever your favorite show is. But he writes these stories. They're called the Pickwick Papers. They're about a man in a club, and I can't even tell you what they're about. It's too hard. They're all over the place, but they're wonderfully funny. And so he starts, and he publishes the first few of them, and people are saying, yeah, that's okay. And then he comes up, then they really take off. After about the 5th or 6th week, they become not just successful, but they become a phenomenon where everybody is reading the Pickwick Papers. Nobody can wait until the next one comes out. They're so eager. So that his career just explodes at this point in his 20s with the Pickwick Papers. So that's a great start for a writer, and it's unusual for a writer like Charles Dickens, because he's pretty much a success from the beginning. Most people struggle, really hard. You look at J.K. Rowling. It took her a while to get going and get published. When she did great. But it took a while. Charles Dickens, boom, right from the beginning, his talent comes out, and he becomes famous, and he starts to make some money. Well, he writes lots of books. He writes Oliver Twist, which is put on still in plays, musicals, all around, movies. It's a wonderful story about a young boy, East End of London, fantastic characters. That's what Charles is really good at. If you took me for Hume 1:11, you remember about Aristotle saying that plot is more important than characters, and it is. I'll stand by that. I think he's right. But characters are incredibly important, and Dickens was just a master of characters. He could create people you love and you hated at the same time, really like nobody else. And he's read, as I said, by everybody, including Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria reigned over England from the 1830s until the very early 1900s. If you could get Queen Victoria, people would at least whisper that, yes, Her Majesty is reading Mr. Dickens' books. Then that really helps your popularity. She loved it. She would laugh, she would cry. She would stay up late past midnight, which she normally didn't do, reading the books of Dickens. And that's just how popular he was across all of society. Poor people who couldn't read at all, and there were quite a few of them in those days, they would pay just a little bit, like a half penny, to have someone in an auditorium read, or in a bar or whatever it was, read to them the stories of Dickens. They loved him so much. So he's appreciated, he's loved across the whole social spectrum. Well, he gets married, meets a nice woman, and they fall in love, and they get married. Actually, he'd fallen in love before this, but he went home to meet her dad, and he said, nope. And so that relationship didn't work out. So he tries again. He's a little more successful now. He's not some poor, struggling journalist. He's an author. And so he marries, and right away has a whole bunch of kids. So, 9 months apart, 9 months and plus apart, but he has 10 of them. So he is a married man, a family man, a man who actually loves his wife very much, loves his children very much. He's very busy, yes, but he doesn't neglect them. He, all 10 of them. He reads them stories at night. He makes up stories. He loves his family. So that's an important part. It's also going to be a setup for one of the great disappointments about Charles Dickens. He goes to America, and what he does in America, he just goes to the east. I mean, because coming up to Malibu probably wouldn't make much sense, since Malibu wasn't even here. But he goes to New York and Washington, Boston, all of that. And he goes on what they call a reading tour. Now, we don't have these, I don't think, anymore. Now, you can go to a bookstore sometimes, and they will have an author who's just come out with a new book, and she may read a passage or a page or two out of the book, but that's something different from what Charles Dickens did. What he did, every city he went to, Charlotte, North Carolina, whatever. Is that North or South Carolina? That's North. Yeah, so wherever he would go, they would rent an auditorium, kind of like this, and he would stand up behind a lectern like this, and he would read from his own works, and people flocked to hear him. He would have hundreds, it would be crammed full of people who just wanted to hear Dickens, and it must have been marvelous to be able to sit in an audience and hear Dickens read his own stories, his own characters, because remember, he's a good actor, a very good actor. He's very good with voices. We don't have any recordings because this is too early to have sound recordings, but we have descriptions of his readings in America and elsewhere, and people, they say it was electric. It was mesmerizing to hear him read stories in the different voices of his characters. It was just, he made a lot of money. He went on tour and made a lot of money. He would do this throughout his life. In England, he was going to come back to the U.S. too and do it a little bit later, which the Civil War got in the way, but he came in after that. So very, very popular celebrity author in this format of reading. He liked America. He talks about some of the problems he sees, because there's some of the same problems that he sees in England, in the UK. But he sees some things like slavery in America. He condemns heartily. He just can't believe it. He's, remember, very involved in social issues, and he's not afraid to talk about it. Nowadays, I mean, he had a lot of them too that he talked about, a lot of different issues. But he comes over to America, makes a lot of money, but doesn't mind criticizing things that he sees. So he does that. Then he goes back to England. Oh, he brought his wife to America too. Left the kids back in England with some friends. Well, books. We're not going to talk about all of the books of Dickens because there's so many that he wrote. You can go over to the library. There's a whole shelf full of them. Or look online if you want to. But things like Great Expectations. So many of his books, not all of them by any means, but start off with a young boy. They're coming-of-age stories. So a young boy who goes through all these difficulties and trials and overcomes them in the end, but it's so much more complicated than that. And again, characters. Miss Havisham, this great character from Great Expectations, who is as a young woman, she's jilted at the altar, her wedding. So her fiance just doesn't show up, which must have been a horrible thing for her. But the rest of her life, she wears her wedding dress. Talk about creepy. She wears this around her big house, so it becomes basically a funeral shroud for her. And she plots and manipulates and does all sorts of things. Great book. It's but again, just one of many that Dickens publishes, including one I bet a lot of you have read, or at least you've read parts of it. He was what you call a Francophile. He loved France. He vacationed in France. He spoke French very well. He loved to go over there, spend summers, took his family with him, and he loved history. And so he wrote a story about the French Revolution. We're talking about a time only like 50 years before him. So there were still plenty of people who remembered the French Revolution, and plenty of people he could talk to. So he writes this great story called The Tale of Two Cities, which the two cities are, of course, London and Paris. And it's got ups and downs. It's got well, I can't even. I mean, if you've read it, you know. If you haven't, you've got to read it. It's just so good. And Dickens is particularly good at opening lines. Did you notice the opening line of the reading for today? Marley was dead, comma, to begin with. I love that. It's one of the great opening lines because it's a wonderful double entendre. Marley was dead to begin the story, but Marley was dead, and then he wasn't so dead. So Dickens was great at opening lines, but he was just a great writer and a great stylist. And the opening lines of The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epic of belief, it was the epic of incredulity. What a wonderful word that is. It was a season of light with a capital. I don't know why. It was a season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. It's a great beginning to this story with these wonderful characters, including this French woman who sits and knits while people are having their heads chopped off. I mean, Dickens was so good at this sort of stuff. But anyway, just one of his many books. Those aren't Dickens books, but I put it up there just to represent that he was a prolific author. Very few people in writing history could come up with this much. Maybe Cicero, he did a lot. Aristotle certainly did a lot. Well, actually, Plato did a lot too. But in modern literature, not many people wrote as many books as Dickens did, and they were almost all successful. I mean, he wrote, some, were better than others, some were more popular than others, but he wrote tons of books throughout his life. And he still is one of the best-known authors. His books have never gone out of print. You can order them right now on Amazon from your seat. They're still there. They're not hard to find like a lot of 19th century literature is. It's all just waiting for you. And it's lasted because it is so relatable across the decades. Now remember, I talked about a flaw. Well, Dickens was a family man. He did love his wife, at least at first. He loved his children. He was a religious man too. But he's in his late 40s, and he's putting on a play. He did this a number of times in his life where he sponsors a play, a drama, and there's a young woman who shows up. She's 18 years old, and she auditions for the play. And Dickens, here he is in his mid-40s, and he just falls for her. Just, true love, at least he thinks. Well, I know it's a story that we've seen before. Just look on the PCH next time you see somebody with a convertible with the top down. Chances are it looks like this. It's some old guy and a young blonde woman next to him. I'm stereotyping, I admit it, but it's a very common story, and it looks like Dickens fell right into that pattern. So what he does, though, I'm a huge Dickens fan. I really admire the guy. I really love his writing. But what he does in order to try to be with his girlfriend is really mean. He can't divorce his wife. I mean, he could legally, but the stigma would just destroy his career. He couldn't do it at that time. So what he does is he tries to get her committed to an insane asylum. He uses his resources to try to do it. That's just cruel. I mean, it doesn't work, thank goodness, but he sends her away and never sees her again, and basically moves in with his girlfriend at this point. Keeps it very hush-hush, very quiet, because, you can't run around with your mistress around London. You've got to be very discreet about it. But still, this continues for the rest of his life with this woman, and he lives another, over 20 years, and then he leaves her a bunch of money in his will, too. So it's a fling that he has going on for a very long time. He makes a lot of people really mad at him. A lot of famous authors of the day who were friends of his break it off with him because they say, I never particularly liked your wife, but this is just beyond the pale, Charles. You can't do this. And so a lot of people just get seriously mad at him for what he did. But he's in love with an 18-year-old, and so he keeps it up for as long as he can, and then he dies. Of course, everybody dies. dies at some point or another. You can go and visit his grave in London in Poets' Corner. He's buried there, and I've been to his grave. Charles Dickens, born 7th of February 1812, died 9th of June 1870. He's buried next to somebody named Rudyard. Any idea who that is? Kipling? Yes, Rudyard Kipling. Like the old joke. Do you like Kipling? I don't know. I've never kibbled. Anyway, dumb joke. Sorry. All right, just trying to lighten things up here. So he's buried next to Rudyard Kipling and buried with a lot of very famous authors. And so he lives to be in his, what would that be, 50s, late 50s? And he dies just as famous and just as successful as he had lived all of his life. And so he had, I mean, let's talk about the history. Let's talk about the social situation that's going on with him and his causes. Let's call them his causes, if you would. He grew up, he worked in a blacking factory. He could have had a lot worse job than that. A lot of boys, even 6 and 7-year-old boys and girls, were working in coal mines. They were working in horrible, unimaginable conditions in England at this time. And Charles wrote about it. He wrote about it in his stories to make people aware of it because they didn't know. They didn't really think about it. They didn't want to think about it. Dickens made them think about it. And he put his considerable resources, not just his literary talent, but his money into doing everything he could to make the lives of children better, making sure they could go to school, making sure they didn't have to spend their lives and die young, working in dangerous jobs. So many children were crushed by falls of rocks or got their limbs cut off by machinery. We're talking about the Industrial Revolution here. And so by the time that he had died, things were a whole lot better for children. Child labor was really improved in Dickens' time. He cared passionately and seriously about these social issues. Also, I mean, he had a lot of different issues he cared a lot about, but one were about women. Now, you can, say, okay, well, why did he try to put his wife in an insane asylum? Yeah, I know, it's kind of a Bill Clinton situation, where you have, you're great to women, not so great to your wife. Charles Dickens was like that because he cared a lot about women, various different women's issues, but one of which he cared a lot about that nobody wanted to touch was what the Victorians called fallen women. These were women who worked as prostitutes and were trying to get out of it. Now, we all know, hopefully we all know that women throughout history, it's been beyond exploitive, the prostitution. And women do not become prostitutes because they think it's fun. Little girls do not dream of being prostitutes when they get older. They are forced into it because it's either that or die, that or starve. They need money to feed themselves, they need money to feed their children. Charles knew this, where a lot of people just looked at prostitutes, looked at former prostitutes, and said, I want nothing to do with that woman. They are a shame to society. Charles said, no, they are not. They are people who need help, and he helped them. He set up different homes. He set up different schooling projects, work projects, so these women could get a career, could get a skill, and make money. I mean, maybe it was sewing clothes, but for hours a day, but still it was something. And they were making enough to feed their children. So much of prostitution. I'm thinking especially in modern times, in say England in the 19th century, was because women just took off, and the women had no skills at all to employ. So it was very much an economic and social issue as well. And Charles works very hard, does what he can to try to help women. Also, hospitals. We take it for granted if you have a medical problem, you can go down to the Santa Monica, hospital, the Ronald Reagan Medical Center at UCLA, get some of the best care in the world. And they won't send you the bill until afterwards, which is very nice of them. That was not an option in England in Dickens' time, yeah, there were some hospitals, but they were few and far between. They were filthy, they were dangerous, people avoided the hospital, that's where he went to die. And so what Charles worked very hard on was to try to make hospitals available and try to make them safe. And so during his lifetime, largely because of his work and a lot of other people, hospitals in England improved markedly. And Charles did a lot of work, things like readings. He would say, come down to the Bethlehem Hospital and hear Charles Dickens read from A Tale of Two Cities. And so he would get up there and they would charge the usual money, and he would make equivalent of thousands of dollars a night doing readings, and he would give it all to the hospital. He didn't take a cut of it, any of that. He did a lot of work for free, for improving hospitals and other social issues. So he was a guy who was very much involved in his society and trying to make it better. Well, let's talk about A Tale of Two Cities. Let's talk about A Christmas Carol instead. We could talk about A Tale of Two Cities. It's really good. I just wanted to look at some of the characters, because Dickens is so good at creating these different characters, and you read it all, so I don't have to go over everything. But Fred, for example, I mean, he's the nephew of Scrooge. I like Fred. Some people have said, "Oh, Fred is just so boring." But Fred, what's interesting about Fred to me is that, I don't know if you have relatives like this. Thanksgiving is coming up in what, a couple of months? Are you looking forward to it, or are you dreading it and thinking, "Oh my gosh, I hope Uncle whoever doesn't show up and start talking about whatever"? Because it just, people leave and have grudges, and nobody can carry grudges like families. I mean, it's so awful, so tragic, and so common, is that people just won't talk to family members anymore because of ills or slights, whether real or perceived. But what I like about Fred is that even though his Uncle Scrooge treats him like dirt, Fred keeps trying. He keeps trying, and he says, "Uncle Scrooge, come to my house for dinner." And Scrooge, in a voice I can't begin to imitate, says, "No, I'm not coming." That's what I like about Fred. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle, God save you," cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. So Scrooge scorns him, at least until the very end of the story. But I just want to bring him out as an example of somebody who, kind of like Dickens, is trying, and he never gives up, even in the face of insurmountable difficulties. Fred keeps trying, and I think he's as surprised as much as anybody by Scrooge's change at the end. Now, the Christmas Carol is full of great lines, that come up or echoed in literature, that stick in our minds and have for 150 years. You remember at the beginning of the story where the men come by raising money for a poorhouse, basically, like Charles's father had been sent to. And so they say, "Mr. Scrooge, you're a very wealthy man. We sure would appreciate it if you would, chip in something to help us," like Charles Dickens did himself all the time. And Dickens has, and they say to him, "Many can't go to these poorhouses." That's what Scrooge says first. "Don't we still have houses for the poor," or something like that. And the men say, "Well, they can't go for various reasons, or lots of good reasons. Many can't go, and many would rather die than be in these poorhouses, because it's a great place to go if you want to catch tuberculosis, or if you want to live a short life." That people were just dropping like flies in these poorhouses. And then Scrooge says, "If they would rather die," says Scrooge, "they had better do it and decrease the surplus population." This was an attitude a lot of people had in England at the time. It's sadly an attitude a lot of people still have in the world, but it's a very famous line: "Let them die and decrease the surplus population." Well, you've got Tiny Tim up on the shoulders of his father there. Tiny Tim is Bob Cratchit. Tiny Tim's a great character. He's certainly one that everybody, hopefully knows. He is a great representation of another thing that Dickens cared about in Victorian society. If you could go back to London in the year 1850 and walk around the streets, you'd see a lot of really interesting things. But one thing you would notice is that a lot of people are hopping or limping around for various reasons. A lot of people are missing most of the teeth in their mouth. A lot of people are blind. A lot of people are wearing eye patches. There was so much injury. There was so much disease at this time. And people were handicapped in all sorts of different ways, like Tiny Tim. And Dickens was very concerned about these people, so he writes Tiny Tim into his story. He was also very sensitive. One of his early stories, he had a character who was handicapped, who he wrote about in a slightly dismissive sort of way. And he got a letter from a woman who was handicapped, and she said, "Mr. Dickens, love your work, but your character does not represent who I am. It does not represent who we are." And so he says, "You're right. I'm so sorry." And from that point forth, he makes handicapped people human in his stories, which was a very unusual thing for anybody to do at that point. And so we get Tiny Tim, we get Bob Cratchit, the hard-working man, the family man who barely has any money at all because Scrooge is so tight and won't even buy a log to put on the fire at the office. But Cratchit is works to do what he can for his family. Marley was dead to begin with. Well, Marley shows up in the story towards the beginning. Marley is a fantastic figure. He is somebody who is a very successful businessman. He made a lot of money in his life. And then he shows he was Scrooge's business partner. And Scrooge, if anybody in the world that Scrooge admires, it was Marley. Because Marley was hardcore about profit and about making money. And Scrooge says this to Jacob Marley. "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Oh, he's learning already. "Business," cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. "Mankind was my business." There's the line. There's the line that echoes for the last 150 years. "The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." What fantastic language. I dream of being able to write a sentence like that. It is so good, and it so resonates with the life of Dickens because he cared so much about the issues that he's mentioning here and that he's talking about here. And he portrays Marley in this great way with these chains. And you read about these chains I forged in life, I wear in death. And they all represent his sins, if you will. And it's an interesting thing, actually, to look at the Christmas Carol as, is it or is it not a Christian story? And people have debated this. You could absolutely put it in a course on Christian literature. It would fit nicely, and yet it's not overtly Christian in many ways. But throughout the story, there's so many elements in there about the basic stories, basic themes of Christian life, about sin, for example. So all of these sins he carries around in this heavy chain, and he says, "Oh yes, Ebenezer, you've got one waiting for you that's a whole lot longer than mine." And it's some great stuff. And you notice he's always in plays and in the book he's bound up like this around his chin because that's how dead people were done. I mean, I don't mean to get graphic here, but when you die, you can't hold your jaw open, and so that's why he looks like that. And remember, this was also I don't know. This has nothing to do with anything, but have you ever seen those Victorian death photographs where they put a family member there in a chair? This is a big thing. It was later on, actually, in the century. But if you look it up, Google it sometime, and look at these, where you'll have grandma sitting there in a chair, all dressed up in her Sunday best, and then you have the grandkids gathered around her, but she's dead. And so they take a photograph of her because they needed a little time back in those days with photographs, and you have to hold still, and nobody can hold still like a dead person. So you find these Victorian 19th century photographs. I find them very creepy, but they were very popular at the time. Anyway, it has nothing to do with anything, but that's, Marley is dead, and certainly he shows up to try to convince Scrooge to change his life. Well, the three ghosts. This is why this book is so good. It has themes that are so universal and last so well throughout the ages. You have three ghosts that come to Scrooge. The ghost of Christmas past is first. Now, you guys are, as I think we talked about, you're about 20, 21, 19-ish, maybe somewhere around there. Most of you are around that age. And you can look back on your life. Oh, wait till you're in your 60s. You can really experience nostalgia then, but you can do it at your age too, very well. Remember high school? Do you remember some of the things you did in high school that you look back on and you think, oh my gosh, I sure wish I'd done that differently. Or middle school, maybe you had a perfect high school life where you made no mistakes. I doubt it. High school is where everybody does something stupid. It doesn't have to be like setting the bank on fire or something like that, but just something, a lot of times it's about choices you didn't make. I look back on my high school days, my high school senior year towards the end, and I think, oh my gosh, why didn't I ask Becky to the prom? I should have done it. It was so dumb. I was so afraid. She was so pretty. She was giving me all the signals, about asking to the prom sort of signals. And I was simply stupid and didn't pay any attention and didn't ask her. And so, anyway, a regret that I carry with me, even though I'm happily married. I'm happily married, but still, I wish I had gone out to the prom with Becky. Anyway, we all have nostalgia. We all have issues about our past. Scrooge has some very serious issues about choices he made between love and money. For one. So looking back on your past, you're not too young to do it at all. And everybody does it. Also the present. Most of us kind of live in the future, but which is certainly not a Christian value. Jesus talks about give us this day our daily bread. It's about living in the present. It's about what Buddhists call mindfulness. And this was certainly something that Scrooge was aware of, and Dickens was aware of too, is getting people to focus on the present, not get lost in nostalgia about the past, not get lost in dreams, but look at what's going on around you. Because Scrooge has no idea what's going on. He has no idea about Tiny Tim, all the troubles that Bob Cratchit is going through. He has no idea about all the ills around him that Dickens was so concerned. And he's saying to Scrooge, but he's of course saying to everybody who reads the book, pay attention to the world around you. Look at just how bad things are. So that's present. And then of course, future. When you see this part of the story, this has been turned into so many films, so many different plays. Sometimes in the films, they will whitewash this a bit. Make it into a musical number or something, which is not what it was. It is one of the darkest scenes of any story I know, where he gets to look at his future. We all think about your future. Think about graduating from Pepperdine. You're going to get a great job. You're going to get married. You're going to have kids. You're going to have a great house, and it's just going to be a wonderful life. And Scrooge gets a chance to actually look, and I hope you do, by the way. But Scrooge looks at his future, and it is not pretty. It is one of the most frightening things ever. And of course, he sees his own death as well. So he gets to review his whole life, past, present, and future. And then the theme of the story, is it redemption? I kind of think it is. Scrooge is one of the shallowest, meanest characters in the original sense of that word that I know. But he has a chance to change. And Dickens says, this is a great story of hope. And Dickens is talking to everybody when he says this. He says, no matter how screwed up you've made your life, there is always a chance for you. And how do you do it? Simply by beginning, simply by trying. That's take the first step. And as it says at the very end of the Christmas Carol, you know, Scrooge went on and he led a very happy life at that point. So it's again, this story works on a lot of different levels. You can read it as a children's story. You can read it as something much, much deeper. But I think it's hard to resist the idea that it is a story of redemption. All right, that's all I have for today. My voice is giving out anyway. So